Welcome to the debate. So if you apply to, let's say, 80 jobs and you hear absolutely nothing back, you probably assume your resume is broken.
Right, you assume you have a surface problem.
Exactly. You tweak the formatting, you swap out some keywords, maybe you run it through a new template. But what if the resume isn't the problem at all?
Well, that's the big question today.
Right. What if the entire concept of the resume, the idea that a single piece of paper holds the ultimate truth of your professional capability, is actually a trap? Today, we are dissecting the concept of the resume as rendering.
And we're looking closely at this tension. In today's hiring ecosystem, should the traditional resume be demoted? Should it go from being the ultimate record of your career to just one of many possible renderings drawn from a deeper evidence layer?
Or does the resume fundamentally remain the primary authoritative vehicle of professional truth that you just have to perfect in order to survive?
Which is a very pragmatic way to look at it.
It is, but I take the position that the resume absolutely must be demoted. It needs to be governed by a deeper, worker-owned source layer, because the real hurdle professionals face today is an interpretation problem. It is not a surface problem.
And I argue that demoting the resume completely ignores the operational reality of the job market. The market strictly and ruthlessly, I might add, evaluates surfaces.
Ruthlessly is a good word for it.
It is. It doesn't have time for depth. Therefore, treating your resume as the ultimate translation artifact is really the only pragmatic way to solve your legibility issues and, actually get hired.
So to set the baseline here, my perspective is rooted in the reality that highly capable people constantly find themselves in this state of being qualified, but entirely unreadable to the market.
Okay, but what do you mean by unreadable?
Well, think about someone who has spent 10 years running complex field operations. Their experience is highly contextual. When they try to compress that reality into a professional surface, like a resume or a LinkedIn profile, it gets stripped of the actual evidence. It loses the context and the foundational trust required to convey their capability. So to solve this, you cannot treat the resume as the source of professional truth. The source has to be what we call a living professional record.
Right, this private, governed evidence layer.
Yes, the resume is simply an output. It's a rendering drawn from that layer. It has to be deeply grounded in that source reality, or you just end up drowning in, generic professionalism.
I come at it from a completely different way. While the concept of a deep, private evidence record sounds philosophically beautiful, demoting the resume is a fundamental misstep.
A misstep? Really?
Absolutely. It ignores the actual mechanics of modern hiring. I agree that an interpretation problem exists. We all know that. But look at the reality of the hiring desk. A company does not evaluate the whole person.
Because they can't.
Right. They simply don't have the time, the budget, or the processing power. They evaluate representations. You, the complex human being, are not fully present in the applicant tracking system.
Just a highly condensed version of you is.
Exactly. If a resume is structured enough to travel through those systems, specific enough to be trusted by a recruiter, and short enough to be used in a 6-second scan, then it is functioning as the definitive operational source for the employer.
But that's a purely functional view.
Because hiring is functional. Demanding that a worker build a massive underlying evidence architecture is an over-engineered solution to what is, at the end of the day, a translation bottleneck on the surface.
Well, let's dive right into that bottleneck, because I think diagnosing the mechanics of that failure is where we first diverge.
Go for it.
Think about the listener right now who just faced that market silence. 80 applications, 0 interviews. Their immediate reaction is, I need better keywords. I need to polish the language.
Which makes sense.
It makes sense intuitively, sure, but we have to pause and look at the mechanism. What source material is actually supporting that polished surface?
Does the source material matter if the surface gets them the interview?
Yes, because if you just polish the language on a resume without enriching the underlying source material, you are generating flat, unsupported assertions. Trying to fix an interpretation problem by only polishing the resume is like handing a bank teller a beautifully designed debit card when you have absolutely 0 money in the checking account.
Oh, I don't know about that analogy.
Let me finish it. Yes, the card looks professional. Yes, it swipes perfectly through the machine, but the transaction still declines at the point of validation because there is nothing backing it up.
But wait, if silence from the market is the immediate pain point, and a generic summary is what's making a highly capable person look ordinary, isn't that surface the absolute only thing that matters in that moment?
Not if it's hollow.
Let's take the classic example of the military veteran transitioning to the civilian workforce. This is a person with a decade of complex logistics, high-stakes leadership, and operational readiness experience.
Right, a very dense record.
Right. But to a civilian hiring manager who is aggressively scanning a pile of like 400 resumes, that rich military history often just reads like warehouse work.
Which is a tragedy of interpretation.
Exactly. Or take a career changer, say a public school teacher trying to move into corporate learning and development. The corporate system fundamentally shrinks their signal. The surface is the failure point because the market outright refuses to look deeper.
But that's exactly my point.
Hold on, let me land this. If the interface fails, the underlying evidence doesn't matter. It never sees the light of day. So polishing the surface isn't hollow, it's survival.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. When that veteran's resume is rejected, the failure isn't just that they used the wrong civilian keywords.
Then what is it?
It's that the translation lacked the operational texture required to generate actual belief in the mind of the reader. If you just open a Word document and change platoon leader to operations manager without drawing from a source layer, it is hollow.
That it passes the ATS?
Barely. And it's still generic professionalism. It says, results-driven leader with a proven track record. That means nothing. But if you draw from a living professional record, you can render grounded professionalism.
Okay, give me an example of grounded professionalism then.
You move from the generic to something highly specific. Something like coordinated weekly handoffs between field operations and review teams after repeated delays were causing rework. You cannot generate that level of grounded, granular professionalism out of thin air. You need a preserved source layer to draw from.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are assuming the hiring manager is running a deep forensic audit during the initial screening.
I'm really not.
You are. You're saying they're checking the bank balance when the card is swiped at the top of the funnel. They aren't. They are driving by at 60 miles an hour.
But they still have to believe what they read.
If the resume doesn't match the exact shade of corporate jargon dictated by the applicant tracking system, you don't even get to the interview stage where that grounded professionalism might matter. And frankly, this idea of a living professional record, let's get practical here.
Please, let's get practical.
What exactly are we asking people to do? You are asking an exhausted worker, maybe an unemployed single mother, to become a full-time archivist of her own life?
That is such a leap.
It's not a leap. To build a governed evidence layer capturing context, privacy boundaries, witnesses, and claims, that doesn't just sound hard, it sounds entirely disconnected from the reality of trying to pay rent.
I understand the concern about the administrative burden, I do, but let's look closely at the mechanics of what the alternative actually forces that single mother to do.
Which is apply for jobs.
Yes, but right now, without a living professional record, she is forced to recreate her professional identity from memory every single time she sits down to apply for a job. Think about it. She is staring at a blinking cursor trying to remember what exactly she accomplished 3 years ago, constantly bending and warping her truth to fit the momentary, arbitrary demands of whatever algorithm she is facing today.
Okay, I admit that is a very real cognitive load.
It is a massive, demoralizing cognitive load. Building a living professional record isn't about becoming a certified archivist. It's simply about creating a private, secure vault.
A vault?
A vault. A digital space where you capture the raw artifacts of your capability as they happen. A project brief you wrote, an email from a stakeholder praising your turnaround time, a spreadsheet detailing the budget you managed.
So it's like the metadata of your career.
Exactly. It's the metadata, and once you have that, you never stare at a blank page again.
But we're taking the simple transaction of applying for a job and turning it into a lifelong audited database of existence. If the employer only wants a one-page summary, why build a library?
Because the library protects the worker. And this touches on what we call the dignity boundary, which is vital to understand here.
Right. The dignity boundary from the text.
Yes, the living professional record exists because corporate systems require proof before they offer opportunity. But, and this is a massive distinction, the record does not prove human worth.
Okay, but how does that actually protect anyone from the market?
You are not more human because you have a robust record, and you are not less dignified because your evidence is scattered or because your work was informal or undocumented. The record serves the worker, not the other way around.
Okay, let's test that dignity boundary in the real world then. Think about the caregiving gap. Let's say a professional is out of the workforce for 3 years caring for an aging parent.
A very common scenario.
Extremely common. Now the market, operating entirely on surfaces, sees a 3-year blank space on the timeline and heavily penalizes it.
Unfortunately, yes.
So, the dignity boundary philosophy tells the worker, your caregiving had immense value. You managed complex healthcare logistics, even if it's undocumented.
That's a wonderful sentiment.
It's more than a sentiment. But the market still demands a surface that explains the gap. The worker still has to translate that deeply personal, emotionally taxing experience into a sterile bullet point on a resume. So aren't we just right back to the surface being the only thing that mediates their survival? The library didn't protect them from the algorithm.
We are back to the surface, yes, but with a completely transformed mechanism of control.
How so?
Without a source layer, that worker looks at the gap on their resume and feels forced into a terrible binary. They either hide the gap entirely and feel the shame of omission, or they overshare deeply private medical details on a public document just to justify their absence.
Which happens all the time.
It happens every day. But with a living professional record, the mechanics change. The worker documents the reality privately in their source layer. They capture the intricate scheduling they managed, the resource navigation, the insurance appeals they won.
So they validate it for themselves.
Yes, they own that truth. It is validated in their own record. Then, from a place of security, they make a governed decision about the rendering.
Meaning what they actually put on the resume.
Right. They might choose to render a very simple, boundary-respecting surface for the public that simply says, family caregiving responsibilities, or health sabotage. They can do that because they know internally that their private record holds the complex evidence. The surface layer prevents the market's demand for a surface from hollowing out their sense of professional worth.
I definitely see the psychological protection in that. Reclaiming ownership of your own timeline is powerful. But I still question the operational efficacy of this when it hits the market.
Operational efficacy in what sense?
Well, you say the real problem is interpretation, not the surface. But interpretation is a surface problem when you are dealing with machines. We're talking about a system that literally does not have the capacity for deep human interpretation.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room.
The massive variable in this entire ecosystem today, artificial intelligence.
Ah, yes, AI.
AI is an incredibly powerful, instantaneous solution to this exact translation bottleneck. If the ATS demands specific phrasing, an AI tool can take that veteran's scattered military history or that caregiver's informal logistics and rapidly translate that hidden value into the precise terminology the system needs.
I see where you're going with this.
Doesn't AI solve the legibility problem instantly? Why do we need this heavy, worker-owned evidence layer when AI can just bridge the interpretation gap on the surface in about 4 seconds?
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because AI actually creates a profound new danger in this ecosystem.
A danger? By helping people translate their skills?
Yes, because AI makes polished, professional language drastically easier and cheaper to generate. But when polish becomes cheap, it completely loses its value as a proxy for competence.
Oh, I see.
AI can take a person who watched a 1-hour YouTube tutorial on machine learning and instantly generate a flawless, keyword-optimized resume claiming they are a strategic AI transformation leader driving enterprise innovation.
Well, that's just lying.
But the AI facilitates it. It takes weak evidence and inflates it to sound impenetrable. It makes someone sound senior in work they only tangentially observed. We have to establish a hard rule here regarding how we use these tools.
Which is?
AI changes the cost of sounding qualified, but it does absolutely nothing to change the evidence required to actually be qualified.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the sheer volume of noise in the system right now?
I have, which is why I'm worried about AI inflation.
But you are assuming the employer has the apparatus to perfectly verify every single claim at the top of the funnel. They absolutely do not. The AI is doing exactly what the broken market asked for. It is matching the candidate's signal to the employer's frequency.
Even if that signal is fake.
Listen, if a highly capable candidate uses AI to turn a disjointed work history into a cohesive, fluent narrative that gets them past the software and into the interview chair, the AI has successfully done its job as a translator. It made the unreadable person readable.
Yes, but
You are worried about truth inflation. You're worried about people faking their way in. I am worried about brilliant, capable people starving in the job market because they refuse to play the surface game, while the people who do use AI take all the opportunities.
that's an interesting point, though I would frame it quite differently. The goal of demoting the resume isn't to refuse to play the game. The goal is to play it with actual ammunition.
Ammunition. Okay.
If AI is used to inflate claims like our theoretical strategic AI transformation leader, that surface might survive the 6-second automated scan. It might get them the interview.
Which is a win.
Is it? The moment they sit down across from a hiring manager for a rigorous behavioral interview and the manager says, "Walk me through the specific constraints you faced during that enterprise rollout," that beautiful AI-generated surface is going to shatter.
Well, yeah.
The transaction declines at the point of validation. That is why AI must be kept strictly as an assistant to rendering, not the source of truth.
All grants that a hollow surface collapses under intense human questioning. But getting to the human is the entire battle. If you don't use every tool at your disposal to engineer the surface, you never get asked the behavioral question in the first place.
And that brings us exactly to the core of the doctrine we're unpacking today, the resume as rendering.
Right.
Let's be very clear about what this means. The resume is not dead. In the living professional record system, the resume is demoted.
Demoted. It's such a provocative word to use for what is still, objectively, the single most important financial document in a person's life.
Provocative, but mechanically necessary. That means it is no longer treated as the source of professional truth. It becomes one possible rendering from a deeper record. If you understand the resume as a rendering, you understand its specific constraints.
So what are those constraints under this framework?
A resume should be structured enough to travel across different applicant tracking systems. It needs to be specific enough to be trusted by the reader. It must be short enough to be used in a fast-paced screening environment.
Okay.
It has to be truthful enough to survive those rigorous behavioral questions we just talked about, relevant enough to serve the specific audience reading it, private enough to avoid exposing your sensitive information, and most importantly, grounded enough to avoid generic professionalism.
I mean, that is a massive checklist for a single piece of paper.
Exactly. Which is why trying to make one perfect resume that acts as your ultimate professional truth is a fool's errand. The advisor's task, or really, the task for any modern professional managing their own career today, is not to create one perfect resume.
Right, because one document can't do all that.
No, the task is to build a record from which many truthful surfaces can be rendered. Think about it. You might need one highly technical rendering for an operations role. You might need a slightly different, more narrative rendering for a public LinkedIn profile.
Or a portfolio.
Exactly. Or a private story bank of case studies to prep for your interviews. All of those different renderings can look completely different, and yet they are all entirely truthful because they share a governed, evidence-based source. Different renderings can be truthful when they share a governed source.
Look, I hear the structural logic in what you're saying. I really do. But let's bring this back to the reality on the ground for the listener.
Okay.
If we tell workers to focus inward on building a private archive rather than focusing outward on matching market language, I still believe we risk making them even more unreadable.
You really think so?
I do. The translation must lead. If the interface is the only thing the market touches, then the interface is the reality. The resume might be a rendering to you, but to the recruiter, it is the entire universe of your professional existence.
I think this is where we reach a fascinating point of convergence in this debate.
Oh, we're converging?
We are. Despite our disagreement on the mechanics, we both recognize that the defining challenge for professionals today is this. Being qualified is fundamentally not the same as being understood.
No, it is not.
The interpretation problem is the greatest hurdle anyone faces in the job market today.
Absolutely. We completely agree on that. A worker can have immense capability, deep experience, and earn trust in one specific environment, like the military or a classroom or a home, and yet become entirely invisible when they try to move across systems.
Invisible to the algorithm.
Right. The silence of the market is not a reflection of their lack of human value. It is a mechanical failure of legibility. My position simply remains that we must respect the absolute power of the professional surface. In a high-speed, low-trust market that only reads interfaces, optimizing that translation artifact is the operational reality that dictates your survival.
And my position remains that to survive modern professional evaluation without losing your truth or your dignity, you must separate the record from the rendering. Demoting the resume ensures that your professional surfaces are actually grounded in truthful, governed evidence rather than drifting into the dangerous, hollow territory of AI-generated generic professionalism.
It really is the ultimate tension in modern work, isn't it? Do you spend your time building the foundation, or do you spend it painting the door so someone actually knocks?
Precisely. Which brings us back to where the listener sits right now. You can spend all your time obsessing over the exact phrasing on your resume, optimizing every single keyword to catch the algorithm's light.
Which you might have to do.
You might. But eventually, the interview happens, the hard questions are asked, the real work is demanded. And in those moments, the market doesn't care how beautifully the surface was rendered. It only cares if the underlying structure can actually hold the weight.
That's a great point to end on.
We will leave it to you, the listener, to decide where to invest your architectural efforts. There is a profound amount of nuance to explore within this framework of the living professional record, and it challenges all of us to look at our own career histories through this dual lens of source and surface. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of truth, rendering, and translation.